Thank you, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Complex Landscape of Evidence Synthesis. My name is Shelby. I'm the digital marketing lead here at Evidence Prime being the company behind Laser AI and Grade Pro. Joining me today is Dr. Danielle Pollock, as well as Artu Novak. Laser AI is conducting a study. They want to gain some insights from specialists engaged in the research and scientific sort of activities and industries to better understand the daily challenges and needs of experts in the various fields. So if you are eligible to participate in this study, there will be compensation, and you can scan this QR code to see if you are eligible. I will also put a link to this study in the chat down below if you are interested. Great. Moving on to the agenda for today's webinar, we're going, as I've mentioned before, we've got Dr. Danielle Pollock, who will give us a presentation about the types of reviews and their challenges, as well as evidence synthesis terms, etc. Next, we will have Artu Novak, who will provide us with the AI solutions and the AI topic of today's discussion. After that, we will have a moderated discussion between both of our speakers and the Q&A session for any questions that you might have. Perfect. I think that's it from my side. I'm going to pass on over to Dr. Pollock. Thank you very much for being with us today. I understand it's pretty late on your in your time zone. So again, thank you.
No, it's perfectly fine. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm very excited. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully all the technology works well. That's okay. So yes, I'm going to be talking about, I suppose, the challenge that we're experiencing in evidence synthesis, in that we have now so many different types of evidence synthesis that it's now creating, I think, a bit of a confusion in the field. And so what being led by Professor Zachary Munn and myself at Health Evidence Synthesis Recommendations and Impact in the School of Public Health at the University of Adelaide, is a way to try and organise these evidence synthesis into an organised taxonomy, where we will also develop a living wiki database. Hopefully it will become a wonderful resource where people can find out all the information they need about how to conduct the various forms of evidence synthesis, and then Arta will tell you how to do them much more easily. But today I'm going to be talking about the reviews upon reviews upon reviews, and this is really a reflection on a scoping review that I conducted, where we tried to find as many different evidence synthesis types that are out there. And then I will try to kind of break a few of the major ones apart to kind of tell you all the difference that we have of them as well. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kaurna people. These are the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands that I work and gather on and live on. And I just want to acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the people, of the Kaurna people to country, and respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Just a few disclosures here. I am a senior research fellow at HESRI in the School of Public Health at the University of Adelaide, but I'm also the chair of the Scoping Review Methodology Group for JBI and chair of the Australian New Zealand Guideline International Regional Group. And the work that I'm going to be talking about primarily today is supported by National Health Medical Research Council Investigator Grant, which is held by Zach Munn. So I think many of us have probably heard of the wonderful Douglas Altman and his, discussion and commentary about the scandalous waste that is happening within our field of evidence, and the scandal of poor medical research. We need less research, better research, and research done for the right reasons. And not just, and I find that, we may feel protected in that, being that we are, many of us may be people who conduct evidence synthesis. But I just want to reiterate here that this is not a primary research issue. We have concerns with poor evidence synthesis being conducted, not for the right reasons, duplication of research efforts, and we need, again, kind of follow this philosophy by Douglas Altman, which Zach Munn said has We need less reviews, better reviews, and reviews done for the right reasons, as opposed to the current state of mass production. And what we were seeing, and this was very common within COVID, was there were approximately 80 reviews or evidence synthesis per day. And just a note, I will switch between the term reviews, so like systematic reviews, scoping reviews, mapping reviews, and the term evidence synthesis. And you'll also see why that's potentially an issue as I continue to discuss. But to me, if I just use the term reviews or evidence synthesis, they mean the same thing. So why is this a problem? Why isn't 80 reviews a day okay? And why can't we just keep the problem, well, keep it going? Well, we are often seen, and reviews are often seen as the solution to research waste. But what we're actually seeing is that it's becoming waste itself, because many of these reviews that are being conducted are on the same topics, or they're being conducted quite poorly. And I think they could be diluting, I suppose, the evidence of what we say and the high, how important reviews are. We need to think about that reviews really are just a couple of steps away from it being implemented into clinical practice. And that makes real world, issues if it's being conducted poorly. Now, the wonderful Leslie Utley has found and identified flaws which affect the conclusions of systematic reviews in her work. And she's actually developed a whole web page on it. So that QR there will take you to the work of Leslie Utley. But what she found was 68 problems with systematic reviews identified. And these, were from, as you see here, insufficient literature searches. So the search actually wasn't comprehensive, to outdated searches, to potentially critical appraisal not being conducted. And what we're finding here is that those problems could very much threaten the reliability and validity of treatment effects. And again, if we think about this has real world implications. And we really need to consider how we conduct reviews. And I think, I come from when I was doing my PhD, I didn't come from a field of methodology. And so when I went and entered this world of methodology, I had come from a culture of, just do a review while you wait for your ethics to be completed. And now that I'm in methodology, I just shake my head and go, why? Reviews are an art form in themselves. They are a piece of research in themselves. And I think we need to stop and really consider before we do them, do we have the specialty skills to be able to conduct them? And then also then go on to it actually need to be conducted. And then we also have an issue for the first time reviewer. And I always go back to this first time reviewer because I so remember being a PhD candidate and being told, you needed to review at the very start of your project. And as a first time reviewer who hadn't even heard about this term, reviews, I was like, okay, what do I actually do? How do I do that? And so these were the kind of the thoughts I had when I was contemplating the reviews that I needed to do. The first one was help. And there was a lot of help out there, but I probably didn't know where to find the help. I then thought that a literature review, isn't that a real review? Not realizing the difference between the different approaches. What even is a review? After I worked out that a literature review might not be the review type that I'm looking for. I went to then going, okay, I've been told I need to do a scoping review. What's the difference between that, a scoping and a systematic review? Then going, is PRISMA reporting guidance or conduct guidance? And then I finally just went on to this one that I needed to probably reevaluate my life choices. But what I did find was it took me a long time and I was confused. And I was confused mostly because of the fact that there were so many different terms, different evidence synthesis terms out there. Now, the scoping review that I have just finished, and it's under review at the moment, hoping we hear good news very soon. What we did was we tried to identify all the different classification systems that we have, trying to essentially, all those approaches that have tried to organize the field of evidence synthesis. And within that, we then gathered all of the terms that they used for the different review types. And I found 1,010 different evidence synthesis terms. Now, the most common was just systematic review, then scoping review, meta-analysis, rapid reviews, and narrative reviews. And you might be going, what are all the others? Well, only 742 of those terms were only mentioned once. And you might say, well, what's the problem then? Well, the problem is, again, we have many people who are doing reviews that might not know that there is a difference between, or might think that different terms or how we say something might actually mean the same thing. And so for many people, that then starts down a track of trying to find methods on how to conduct that review type, but that review type might not even actually exist. And so we really and desperately need to develop clarity in this area to avoid the confusion that is out there. Now, this is a word map, word cloud. This is all of the 1,010 different terms that are out there. And you will, if you look really closely, you can see all of them, but it's quite a lot. And it took me a lot to try and get this all into one image. So the question then goes, well, we have all these different evidence synthesis types or review types. Why can't we just have systematic reviews? Why do we have to be overly complicated? Can't we just have one type of review and just call it that? Well, the simple fact is that we're all complex. And if we look at ourselves in this group, we'll probably see a lot of differences. And we ask different questions. And that's the same as decision makers ask different questions to clinicians. Clinicians and funding research and patient partners and public have all different questions from each other. And those questions actually require different approaches. And by being able to have these different review types allows us to be able to ask as many different questions as we want, but still ensure that we have a transparent and rigorous approach. We are ensuring that we have systems so that the questions that decision makers ask, which might be like, what type of research has already been undertaken or what policy documents already exist on this matter just as much as the questions of, does this intervention or does this drug actually work, which might be important to, say, clinicians and to patients. But what we're trying to do is ensure that the foundations of the answer of that question is based on transparent and rigorous processes that ensure that we have trustworthy evidence supporting each and every one of those answers. Because each one of those answers, again, could lead to real-world impact. So I've got Slido, and I'm hoping this will work internationally, and I'm really sorry if it doesn't, but this is only going to work if we have participation. So can I please have everyone join the Slido through their phone at slido.com, and I want you to name all the different types of systematic review. Now, I'm doing this because despite the fact that we have, why can't we just have systematic review? The term systematic review itself, it can be complicated. So if we think about it, JBI has, say, systematic reviews of effectiveness or systematic reviews of diagnostic test accuracy or even qualitative reviews. I've given 3 there. Think of as many as you can. It shouldn't stop you. And let's see what type of systematic reviews we get. Let's see if we can get as many as possible in a 2-minute. Prognostic, fantastic. Yeah. Prognostic and diagnostic. Prevalence. We've got 2 people participating and giving us all of these. Amazing. Keep going. Can we get to more? Targeted. Yeah. Values and preferences. There's a Pico, yep. Wow, look at what we're getting here. This is why I love Slido, because I love the interaction that we get. Now, what I find very interesting is I said systematic reviews, and the biggest one we're getting is scoping here. And I'll talk about the difference between systematic reviews and scoping reviews, I promise. That's probably now going to go a bit lower as I talk about that. Narrative, systematic reviews, umbrella, critical, reviews of reviews. Interestingly, I want to kind of also talk about this because with reviews of reviews, we have umbrella reviews and we have overview. Those are three very popular terms, but are they the same thing or are they different? We have reviews of experiences and then we have qualitative reviews. Are they the same thing? And what I'm trying to get at, and I'm going to stop this because I only have 20 minutes. I want to get through this all. Don't worry, there will be more questions for you to answer. So keep your Slido open. But this has been phenomenal. Look at what we're seeing here. And this is also kind of what I found here, because just the term, the terms or the words next to the term systematic review, I had quite a few different terms describing specific systematic review types. And that was 158 terms describing specific systematic review types. So that would be systematic reviews of cost effectiveness, or systematic reviews of epidemiological studies, or studies of prevalence, experiential, systematic reviews of descriptive reviews, or by association. So what we're finding here is that we have 158 terms, or 158 different types of evidence synthesis that are just associated with the term systematic review. So just even systematic review, the term itself, is extremely complicated and confusing. And if we're looking at it, what is the actual definition of a systematic review? How do we know a systematic review is a systematic review? And that in itself is still being looked at. So many things, and I just kind of want to highlight just the complications that we have created. So I'm going to go and I want to talk about a few different major types of reviews that we have here. But the most common question that I will ever get is, what are the differences between a scoping review, mapping review, and evidence and gap map? And I should probably ask the difference between a systematic review and a scoping review. And I think we should have made a running tally on the amount of times I said the word review for this. So does anyone want to write what they think the difference between these three reviews are? Do you actually think there is a difference? Right, it's scoping, yeah. Because I've just did a survey of methodological uncertainties between these three different reviews. And so far, in a very preliminary analysis, a lot of it is I actually don't know if there's a difference between these three. So some people think it's the question, a PCC, so that's population, concept, and context, versus a PICO, which is population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. A scoping would be broader, levels of interactiveness. And I suppose this brings us to something else to discuss, is how do we actually differentiate between review types? And there's many different ways to differentiate between reviews, and we are looking at the best way to do that. A level of extraction, that's one what we would say, definitely. Broadness of question. Scoping can decide whether a systematic is feasible. Excellent. Gap map is a more visual way of presenting information. That is what I generally say as well. And then we've got purpose. So I think many of you believe that there are differences, but feel free to say if you actually don't think there's a difference. Methodology, fantastic. Loving the interaction. Thank you so much. Okay. Now I'm going to try and clarify at least this for the next few minutes as I go on to the next slide. And I want to also reiterate, there is a lot of information here. I won't go through it all. This is actually part of a paper that I've just that has just been published, where we were asked to compare the differences between systematic reviews, scoping reviews, mapping reviews, evidence and gap maps, and overview. And that is the how-to scoping review and the Journal of Epidemiology. I will put that in the chat once I finish though. So what I get asked is the difference between a systematic review and a scoping review. And I kind of go, well, a few questions here. If you are looking at the feasibility, the acceptability, the meaningfulness, or the experience or the effectiveness of an intervention, I would suggest you're probably looking at a systematic review question here. If you want your results to potentially be implemented and directly change clinical practice, you're probably looking at a systematic review there. However, if you're looking at and going, well, I don't really need to change clinical practice here, but what I do need to know is, what are the concepts? Where is the literature? Where is the evidence? What is the evidence saying? Clarifying concepts that are out there, then you're probably looking at a scoping review. Now, many people are still trying to work out the difference between mapping and scoping review. And what I will say is that I think the massive difference between these different review types probably comes in the level of extraction. Scoping reviews have an extreme amount of extraction, and the amount of textual evidence that we gather and then can bring together and categorize and organize is absolutely astronomical. And a lot of the times we can also develop these into categories, and we do this kind of inductively or deductively. Mapping reviews are very much descriptive frequencies that we would be gathering. Which countries, what did it talk, what field, very high level, predetermined extraction items that are there. The evidence and gap maps would very much be your very beautiful, and I love it, a good evidence and gap map, which is the visuals. And it will provide a wonderful visual, and they can and are generally a PICO based, but I have also done these with a PCC framework as well. So very visual, the evidence and gap maps. Now, what we've done here is that we've also got defined these by purpose. So what you'll see a systematic review, if I go to this, is that, and I actually want to say all of these methods here are transparent and rigorous. The next myth we often get is a scoping review the same as a systematic review? Well, all of these are part of the evidence synthesis family, as we say. They are all to be conducted transparently, and they should all be rigorous. Those values of evidence synthesis should not differ in any review time. But what we will find is that a systematic review answers very specific questions, whilst a scoping review answers broader, more hypothesis-generating questions. And even though a scoping review is not a systematic review, it is still done as transparently and as rigorously. And you'll see that here, things like, should there be a protocol? Well, yes, a protocol registration should be, a protocol should be developed, and it should actually be registered or put on open science framework. We even have the questions here. You'll see that a systematic review is a narrow research question. We'll find a scoping review is broad. We'll find a mapping review may even be even broader, but then we'll find an evidence and gap map might have a bit of a more narrower question, but it's not necessarily saying, what is the findings of that evidence. We're looking at where is the evidence, what is the evidence available on menopausal women and treatment approaches, not does this treatment work, which would be the systematic review question. The question you may ask regarding, for a scoping review would be, what is what evidence has been conducted in terms of looking at the different study designs. You can look at the outcomes that they have used, the measurement tools that have been used. So it will break it down as well. I've got 3 pages of this, and very much can be found in the paper that I talked about. The different evidence sources as well, we'll often find that systematic reviews and evidence gap maps and overviews are looking at peer-reviewed publications or looking at clinical trial designs, whether that be primary peer-reviewed and systematic reviews and reviews of the evidence, while scoping reviews are looking more broadly. And the biggest question we have is risk of bias. Risk of bias is definitely conducted in systematic reviews, but optional for these 3 ones here, and not for overviews as well. And I suppose the difference we find here between these types is the impact. But most of the times they are there to inform practice. What we would say here, though, for the scoping reviews, mapping reviews, and evidence and gaps is that they're more about focusing on future research priorities. So there's many different ways that we've tried to help people make these decisions, many different papers, and these can be all found on the JBI Scoping Review Network page, but these are decision trees that we've helped. But if you don't want to do that, we also, the wonderful Andrea Trico has developed, and her team have developed a right review tool. And this right review tool is fantastic, as it can help you make the decisions by asking you a few questions about what guidance you and then direct you to the evidence synthesis type that you should be doing with. And I just also want to invite anyone who would like to be part of our evidence synthesis taxonomy initiative, where we're trying to organise the field of evidence synthesis, as I like to say, but really trying to make sure that reviews are done for the right reason, in the right methods. Please join us. You can join our advisory board. We are a global community. I think we now have over 180 people, so please do not hesitate to join us. And I just want to thank the leader of our team, Zach Munn, and the leader of this project, and also Sabira Hassanoff, our the amazing research officer that does a lot of the work. And these are some pictures of all of us at the various evidence synthesis taxonomy initiative events that we have. So I've given a whole lot of problems, not a whole lot of solutions. I'm hoping Arthur provides a solution. So I'll hand it over to him now.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and thank you for the interactive part. I mean, it was really, really great, and I really admire your level of, I would say, intensity in your presentation at such late hour, your time. So that's a high bar for me to now approach, and let's look at the AI part here. And basically, I just wanted to follow up on what you said, that we have this potential research waste, 80 reviews published per day, and now we got AI. And we know that during the pandemic, this surge in terms of number of published reviews was very much due to, also people just having immediate need to find evidence, and but now with AI, it looks like we also have the means to do this at quite rapid pace. So what can go wrong in this situation? So I think that something that springs to mind immediately is that if people are not doing this properly from the methodology perspective, if we are now having some tools to automate this, and tools that are easily available, and tools that you can ask to write a manuscript for you, that's actually a recipe for even bigger trouble. And I think we all know about these anecdotes of papers that were produced with, for instance, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT had, for instance, this very specific kind of opening to many of its responses. So it was saying, as a research assistant, I cannot do something. And we actually found papers that had this exact text in them that passed peer review and were published. So we know that people are using ChatGPT to actually write papers and to look for references. We know that people in many jobs are using these tools, even if all the evidence says that that these tools are not safe to use, kind of unattended. And now, over I think a couple of last weeks, really, we have this increasing trend of adding something called deep research. So this started with Google's Gemini tool, and then was picked up by other tool providers, like we have this in ChatGPT, in Grok, Perplexity, U.com. In many of these tools, we have something called deep research, or something that sounds very similar to this, like deep search. And the idea here is that this is really implementing the process of a literature review, because typically these tools go to the web pages and they try to first search, then screen, select which pages are the most relevant, and then extract data and create a summary. And when you look at what we have on the slide right now, which is a screenshot from a tool called U.com, this actually sums up some sort of a web search, reading through 74 sources, looking for some specific, let's say, sub-questions that are used to then synthesize the final evidence, the final summary. So something like this already exists and is, I think, used quite heavily. And also in the realm of scientific papers, we have tools like Undermined AI, Scholar QA, Elicit, and so on, which also implement this sort of a workflow, but limit the search to scientific papers, very often with better results. And I hope that you will also appreciate that the example that I have on this slide, which is using Undermined AI, is actually using something from my job, and the previous one was about ciabatta baking. So I'm actually using the tools properly. I use the scientific tools for my research, and let's say general purpose tool for my cooking. So but we know that it's not universal, and people can kind of use any of these tools for any purpose. So I think that this can be troubling, that we now have something where you can basically put your PICO or your description of review, and then these tools will actually do a pretty good job of creating such, let's say, broad scoping review, finding the papers, doing the summary, extracting the main findings from all these papers. So I think that this can be troubling in terms of kind of accelerating this number of how many potentially low quality papers are published. Because I think that the main problem is that AI tools allow us to do faster something that we know how to do, but also something that we don't know how to do. So we have a lot of research into how the tools are used for creation of search strategies. And I believe that across all problems with conducting systematic reviews, and how really what impacts the quality in many cases is that the search strategies are not very strong, and they are not reviewed by an information specialist. I believe that this is also one of the findings from Danielle's group, that this is often cited as a problem, both in terms of search comprehensiveness, but also in terms of just the search strategy quality. And ChatGPT, for instance, is able to generate, let's say, a PubMed query. It will very often make up some mesh terms, which is probably something that we can correct pretty quickly. But also in terms of kind of serious evaluation of the quality of these search strategies, we see that they tend to have high precision, but this comes at a cost in terms of recall. And of course, this is very troubling for systematic reviews, maybe less troubling for some other types of evidence synthesis, but still, I think that the main part is that, and I really love this flow diagram here, that first we need to kind of find out whether it matters whether the output of our work is correct. So if no, then of course it's safe to use ChatGPT for pretty much everything we want. But if we indeed care about the correctness of this result, then we need to really answer this question whether we have the expertise to verify that the output is correct. So I think that if we have, for instance, an information specialist that is using these tools to help them brainstorm search strategies or help them maybe do some formatting and so on, but they are very capable of writing the search strategy themselves, then it's, I think, really of little concern. But at the same time, if we have somebody who has no idea how to write the search strategy or how to screen, and they are just using some AI tools to do this for them, then of course it's really a recipe for a disaster. So, on the contrary, how can AI help with the issues that I believe we discussed in the previous presentation, and we are also kind of bringing up a lot of time in terms of the problems with the field in general. So first of all, I think that something that I took from Danielle's presentation is that all review types should maintain transparency and rigorousness. So the idea here is that we can kind of trade off comprehensiveness, for instance, depending on the type of use and the resources that we have, but pretty much, but basically, what we always need to have is both the transparency and adequate level of rigor. And in this sense, I think that AI can really help with something that I believe is a problem right now, which is really to help the authors review and improve the protocols, which I think will help in both of these domains. We know that in many cases people are not registering the protocols, maybe not writing them in, let's say, sufficient detail. And I think that AI can really help here because we can encode, and this is something that we are actively doing as part of our tool, we can encode the best practices in conducting different types of evidence synthesis, and then to have really this tool read through your protocol, suggest some, let's say, gaps, suggest some improvements. And in fact, one of the reasons that we are so interested in creating these protocol editors and having this AI-driven review of protocols is that we believe that really having a good protocol is necessary for reliable automation. Because if we cannot specify very clearly what we want to get, then we cannot count on this AI tool to kind of read our minds and find out what we would do with this limited information. So we need to have good instructions for AI to execute. And this is really the protocol. So I think that both for the quality of the research and also for reliable automation, we just need good protocols, and I hope that AI can help here. So I already had this slide, and this is not by mistake. I think that having these deep research tools, especially the ones that are kind of tuned to scientific papers, is of great value. And it can really help jumpstart the process. It can help us find some seed studies, so some studies that we think should be included within the review. These studies in turn can be helpful for verification of our research strategies, for instance. So having something that can very quickly give us an idea about what's there, I think is very helpful. Of course, we need to make sure that we are not kind of data picking, and it's not like we are just relying on this completely, because of course, this tool presents some number of results, but it doesn't mean that if we kind of focus only on the type of documents that it found, we may be missing out some other ones. So human creativity together with kind of this verification, I think this can go to great lengths. So what we are also doing in a similar area is something we call laser tags, which is having the AI automatically assign some tags or categories, especially across intervention and population domains on the abstract level. And what this in turn allows us to do is that very often if there is potentially a very sensitive search strategy with a lot of results, and it's potentially not possible to screen all of these papers by hand because of the research considerations, we can find out whether we can make this search strategy, for instance, more specific by automatically tagging the references and seeing how, for instance, different intervention tags are distributed across the data set. So we had one study, this is a poster that we presented in November, where we applied this approach to an update of the systematic review, where we are basically looking through every abstract and trying to figure out whether the population intervention, whether they meet the inclusion criteria for the review. It's not a filter. I mean, it's not something that you can put as part of, let's say, your search process and just pre-screen everything automatically, because there are like many nuances that cannot be picked up by this yet. And at the same time, we know that a lot of information is actually not available on the abstract level. So of course, it's not the final solution to the screening problem. But still, I think in terms of kind of mapping what's out there, informing potentially whether we want to do a systematic review for a specific PICO, or maybe do first some sort of a scoping review, I think that this can be extremely useful. So in terms of extraction and also full text screening, I think one very nice side effect of using AI is that most of the tools, including ours, try also to highlight something within the text to help the user understand how this AI suggestion was generated. And this makes it much easier to actually leave this audit trail for anybody in the future that would be interested in understanding how this data was extracted, or especially for risk of bias assessment, how the reviewer really arrived at this conclusion. So while many people do this when, for instance, doing risk of bias assessment, they have some strategies to highlight or copy part of text that they use to make their judgment. I think that this tool support, having AI highlight this for you and making it easier will also benefit the quality and also transparency. We also think that AI tools for table extraction, for kind of automating these very error-prone and mundane actions, this will also lead to improvement in quality, because anytime we need to do a lot of copying and pasting, I believe that it's there is also a very big room for error. So if we at least have some sort of a co-pilot that helps you in moving this data from tables, for instance, into extraction forms, I think it's also very helpful. And finally, in terms of summing up the results and visualizing and exploring data, AI is actually pretty good at generating code and in many cases doing some analysis that used to be very time consuming, and for this reason people may actually skip them, is now becoming easy. So here you have an example of a tool where you can take data from your data set, create a plot based on the data. And now if you want to have on the y-axis something that is actually not in the data set, but something that needs to be calculated, you can just describe this with text and use AI to follow your lead and create like a data crunching code that will generate this extra column and this chart for you. So I believe that this is also a very good use of AI and how we can improve the quality of our work with help of technology. Thanks so much. We'll be now moving to the Q&A session, and I already see that we have some questions. So Danielle, I guess many of them will be to you. So the first question that we have here is that the biggest concern with AI as a solution is understanding whether the methodology is compromised or not. So how do we review whether the tools themselves are good or accurate for our teams to use related to methodology? So do you have any ideas on how to actually vet the tools, or how to make sure that the tools will not compromise the quality of reviews?
Yeah, are we talking about critical appraisal, risk of bias tools here? I think the question, I think they're very well established already within systematic reviews, and especially the systematic reviews of effectiveness and the interventions. And I see a lot of the AI very aligning their work to that specific question and review type. Now, the problem that we have are, scoping, mapping, evidence, and gap maps is that there is actually no critical appraisal tool or, risk of bias tool for those reviews at that review level. And so AI has nothing to learn because there's no map that we've, no essential structure that we've developed yet as a community. And they are something that we're trying to develop, but, takes time and funding, and it does take a lot of people to come together as a community to do that. So I think at the moment the best approach with developing these tools still remains, making sure that they're initially based on the evidence that's available, and then by consensus with many different types of experts in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are these collaborations of groups creating the tools. So both, let's say, the research projects and also the commercial projects. And this is a very, I think, common theme to develop some standardized benchmarks, so you can actually kind of compare the tools and find out which one is, let's say, applicable to your work. But I think, it's always a little bit of a problem, like we have with AI tools in general, that every week there is like a new model, and there are benchmarks that people now overfit because it's a little bit like if you set something as the metric, everybody wants to maximize the metric, and that's really the problem with every benchmark. So what I, for instance, think would be helpful is to have some sort of a pass or fail status. So, some sort of a benchmark that is, maintained by an external party and it's not made public. So you kind of just get pass or fail note, and this way the community can find out which tools work versus which don't work. But we don't have this arms race of people trying to be 1% better at, I don't know, screening some single review, because that's I think a very short road to actually, with benchmarks not telling you anything interesting. Great. So we also have another question directed to you. So do all the terms of reviews natively impact research?
I think it adds to so much more noise, and we don't have time for noise with how busy every single one of us as researchers, how quick the research needs to come out now in order to be able to answer questions that are so desperately needed by the community. And by having all of this noise, it's just not helping at all. We need to be clear, concise, and I'm very much just get to the point. And so I'm hoping that the taxonomy will kind of allow for that clarity. So I think it does impact.
Great. And there is also a question here. So if we have a review that is not followed by a quality meta-analysis, does it automatically make it a scoping review?
No, because the systematic review and scoping review ask very different questions. So just because a meta-analysis can't be conducted doesn't mean that it's not a systematic review. It still is, because your question would make it a systematic review. The fact that you did critical appraisal, you and you would follow methods of even how to narratively report the findings. Whilst the scoping review wouldn't be aligned with the same question, that you don't really focus on the types of questions that you'd want to answer in a systematic review. So it's still systematic review even without a meta-analysis.
Great. So next question is a longer one, and the person says that as a PhD student and first-time reviewer, they had a great time using the JBI resources, and now they are beginning an integrative review and feel completely lost. So the question is whether something at the standard of, let's say, JBI resources would be available for integrative reviews.
Yeah, integrative reviews are an interesting review type. There is, a lot of people who don't particularly see them as a review type because they're not necessarily advocating for very transparent and rigorous approaches. I don't know any other guidance for them, just because it's not a review type that I would personally do.
Great, thanks so much. So one more question from the audience is, how many registries should we consider when registering the protocols for systematic scoping reviews?
Yeah, I think for systematic reviews, Prospero was enough. Everyone goes to Prospero, it's fantastic. Prospero don't currently accept scoping review product registration. One day maybe they will, but because of that, I would probably put your protocol up on Open Science Framework. I mean, even if you register, Open Science Framework isn't a registry database, but at least it's available. You can get a DOI, cite it, and the reason why we are very big on these protocol registries is to allow for openness within the scientific community.
Yeah, so I have a related question, because if we assume that people register their protocols, and if people search in the registries before they start work, then we should actually get rid of this research waste. But I think that the elephant in the room is really the incentives, right? So even if I know that there is already a systematic review on the very same topic, I think, but my aim here really is to have a publication. It may not actually stop me from redoing this for whatever reason. So, what do you think should we do in terms of incentivizing research communities, publishers to really prioritize quality over quantity? Do you have any ideas here?
I don't have any solutions. I think, that's a very real concern and issue in the community. But I think we have to kind of remember why we're scientists in the first place, and, the beliefs that science comes from. And we're here to further knowledge, not and by replicating and duplicating the same review type is not service for your community. And that's what we're here. We're in service of our community. So I hope to remind everyone that is why we're ultimately scientists in the first place. And just realize that just because a systematic review has been done on what you thought the question should be doesn't mean there are not other questions that need to be answered. And I think, just allowing yourself to accept that the science is taking you in a different direction.
Yeah, so of course, if we all spend time on doing the same reviews, other questions will kind of remain unanswered. That's really, I think, the problem.
Yeah.
But at the same time, do you see also some value in having these overlapping reviews? So one thing that, for instance, we see is that when you look at risk of bias appraisals of the same RCTs coming from different reviews, and there are not only kind of inter-rater agreement scores, but really inter-consensus agreement scores, right? Because in these reviews, these appraisals are typically coming through the typical process of having 2 or 3 people arriving at the final conclusion. And then when we compare the appraisals from different reviews, even from different Cochrane reviews that include the same RCTs, we see a lot of discordance. And maybe this is really the problem of the tools, of the risk of bias tools. Maybe this is the question of the level of subjectivity that we allow, and this is always a big question, really. But do you think that in this sense, if people are actually getting to different results, is there any value in having like duplicate reviews?
That is very interesting. And, I come from primary research where it was, if someone replicated your study and it worked and you got those same results, it meant that you did well. But when we do that in systematic reviews and we're like, oh, why did you redo that work? I think, that there is some debate about if someone has critically appraised that study, why can't we just put that appraisal of that study on a database? It's already been done. Why does my team now need to redo something that's already been done? And that study's now been praised by many different people. And I think there's probably someone out there who could develop such a database and platform. But it's interesting, and I think I need to think on it a little bit. Ultimately, would that critical appraisal then change the findings, though? I mean, it might affect the certainty of the evidence potentially, but that's a very good question.
And do you think that basically this is a well-defined problem? I mean, if we have the same RCT, should we expect that the risk of bias assessment should really kind of end up being the same, no matter who is doing this? Or do you think that there is this level of subjectivity that will always be there?
I think there's a level of subjectivity, and that might be dependent on the particular review question, because our RCT might be in for a slightly different question to yours, and so then the subjectivity might be, or the context might slightly differ in it. But ultimately, most of the scores should be the same. That's the aim of these tools, or not the aim, but that's part of the tools themselves. So hopefully, and then But I have a question for you, Arta. So I see a lot of AI and I get very, very excited because anything to make the work easier, I'm all for. And I was looking at the work that you're saying, and if it could just take away some of that load of extraction, that makes my heart very happy. But one of the concerns I have is that there's been so much focus on systematic reviews of interventions that when are the other review types going to be noticed in the world of AI? And are they kind of being ignored for now because they're very textual heavy and have no clear framework to them?
Yeah, and we actually also did some work in automation of reviews of patient values and preferences, and we even have another project like this currently ongoing. So I completely understand these challenges, and this is partly because I think especially new studies that examine different interventions are much more standardized. So it's easier to automate something that is more structured. Once you go to, for instance, values and preferences, just to take this one example, since the methodology here for even kind of conducting these studies is not so well established, you have much more, I would say, kind of corner cases to also cover. It's more difficult to train these models, to evaluate them, and so on. So I think that this is really one of the reasons, and also the fact that people are really doing a lot of these intervention reviews. So that's some sort of a Pareto rule at play, but I fully agree that it's a little bit like what we said. If people kind of focus too much on doing, let's say, I don't want to say easy stuff, but the stuff that was already done, then we are still in the same place in kind of addressing the questions that we also need to answer, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I think we are almost out of time, so I hand back to Shelby.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I was just about to say that we have reached the end of the webinar. Dr. Pollock, I really want to thank you for today, Arthur, as well to you and to everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and participate. The questions up ahead, in the industry are going to be extremely relevant. I have shared some links down below to the study that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, as well as if you're interested in laser AI, you can book a demo and a trial version. I'm just going to share the slide where you can scan the QR code if you'd like as well. Other than that, feel free to jump off. Arta, Danielle, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a lovely day and night.
Bye.